I thought it would be fun to chat a little bit about evergreen trees. So you know the old saying, good fences make good neighbors. Well, great trees make great fences and are a lot more attractive and obviously beneficial for the environment and all sorts of other stuff than, say, a PVC fence or a wooden fence or anything else. So I thought we would talk about living fences, not necessarily fences or hedges, but larger evergreen trees. One of the other reasons that I thought we would talk about these is if you drive around town right now, some of the more popular large evergreens that were planted in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, as a lot of neighborhoods were being built in our area in particular, but kind of throughout the Midwest. Some of those varieties, like Austrian pine and Scotch pine and Colorado spruce, three really good selling evergreens, three really hardy plants 30, 40 years ago, are now experiencing severe decline. However, there are a lot of really great choices for replacement, and so I thought we would talk about some of those. So we're mostly going to be talking about larger evergreens, things that you can use for screening, for windbreak, for privacy, or just something that you can put Christmas lights on or just have some winter interest. I'm not going to today delve into smaller, dwarf evergreens, some of that kind of stuff. Maybe we'll do that on a future episode. So we're going to start right over here with some of our spruce. So as I mentioned, the Colorado spruce, or blue spruce as it's more commonly known, although not technically a good name for it. They are blue. However, the proper name is Colorado spruce. So Colorado spruce are very susceptible to this disease, this needle cast. However, not all spruce are susceptible to it, and some are going to hold up much better than others. This one right here is Serbian spruce. Now, Serbian spruce is mostly resistant to needle cast. If you had a really stressed out tree, I've seen Serbian spruce get it, but it's not really a common issue on them. Serbian spruce is known for two things in particular. It has a dark green top side to its needle, and it has a really nice whitish blue underside. So the other thing it's known for is this sort of arching or almost slightly weeping branching structure. And so when these trees mature, and you're starting to see it a little bit, if you look down the line of these trees right here, you're starting to see a little bit of that droop in there. And what that does is it gives the tree almost a two-tone appearance because it's got the dark green on the top and the blue on the underside. And with the droop of the branches, you can see both in some cases. So it gives it a really nice two-tone appearance. It's also one of the more small stature spruces. They only get about around here in the landscape about 30 feet tall and maybe 10 or 12 feet wide. They're not going to be a 20 or 30 foot wide spruce like a Colorado or a Norway or something like that. But hardy, relatively fast growing, nice looking trees. The next group, which is probably our best selling spruce for sure, and the one that I use the most of, is this one right here. It's called Norway spruce. So Norway spruce, in my opinion, is completely resistant to needle cast disease. I have never seen a Norway spruce get it. They, even in the case like at our house in particular, we inherited, I don't even know how many, maybe a dozen very large, mature Colorado spruces when we purchased the home 6 years ago. And needle cast had already set in. Those trees were in various stages of decline. On the same property, I have, 8 or 10 or 12 very large Norway spruce, same age, 30-ish years old, with absolutely zero disease issues on them, even though they're right next to each other in some cases. In some cases, they're just in the same yard, but in this case, they are side by side. There's Norway spruce and then Colorado spruce, literally kind of intermingled. No issues there. So I'm very confident in Norway spruce, and it's disease resistant. It also happens to be the fastest growing of the spruce. So if you're looking for an evergreen that is tough as nails, will provide a really good windbreak, a haven for the birds, and really great privacy and screening, Norway spruce is a really good option. And we have a variety of different sizes, from small little ones that you could plant on your own to big giant ones that will offer an immediate impact. The needle on these is also much softer than the needle on Colorado spruce, which I like. So it is a stiff needle, but it's pretty soft. It doesn't have the prickly, pokey ends that Colorado spruce has. So just a little softer texture too. So if you did want to put Christmas lights or something on it, you definitely could do that. Along the same lines with Norway spruce, we have a very unique upright variety called Cupressina, or columnar Norway spruce. So this is a tree that only gets about 6, maybe 8 feet wide at full maturity. So you can see the branch angles on this the branches are almost parallel to the main central leader here. So the branch angle is very, very tight. Whereas on the regular Norway spruce, those branches come up perpendicular to the central leader. On Cupressina, they come out almost parallel to it. So it gives it this very upright, narrow shape, which is excellent for small properties, narrow lot line areas, or just somewhere where you want a really vertical accent. Maybe the corner of the house, or something to like frame a patio, one on either corner, something like that. Really good. It also is a great, nice, formal appearance evergreen. So if you have a more modern, formal landscape, this would be a really good choice for you. It makes a great hedge or wall, so they can be planted relatively close to one another, or they can be spread way out and used, like as an accent, as I was mentioning. So really great tree, just as hardy, just as wind tolerant, still relatively fast growing, so really good choice. Height-wise, these are probably going to get 20 to 30 or so. You've probably heard me mention before about sizes listed online and things like that. When we look at Norway spruce, if you look up Norway spruce on the internet or in a lot of publications, things like that, you may see heights of 75, maybe even 100 feet tall, things like that. It's not impossible for a Norway spruce to get that big, but in the landscape setting, in a reasonable amount of time, that's what we go for with our sizes. So when you see our signs or you look on our website, those are going to be more that 20-ish year size in the landscape. Trees always will be smaller in a landscape situation than they would in the wild or in their native habitat. So, if we're talking about a white oak tree in a prairie or savanna area out here in, western Kane County somewhere, you could probably find one that's, 100 tall and 100 wide, or 80 tall and 140 wide. But in the landscape, maybe half that. So just a little bit there on the tree sizes. So moving away from spruce, I wanted to talk about these guys right over here. This is called Green Giant Arborvitae, and we've got a bunch more down on the far end over here. Green Giant is probably more aptly called a Western red cedar than an arborvitae. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of arborvitae, of the traditional emerald green, some of those varieties that you see that are really narrow that people line their properties with. I think they have a place for sure, and they're fine plants. It's just more of a personal preference thing. But I really like the Green Giant Western red cedar, or Green Giant Arborvitae. If we look at this over here, it has a really nice natural kind of droop to it. The branches on Eastern Arborvitae, like Emerald Green and Techni and some of those, their leaf is kind of more oriented like this, kind of more vertically. And on the Western Red Cedar or Green Giant Arborvitae, they kind of hang more like this and almost overlap like shingles on a house. So it gives it a really nice natural appearance, which is more my preference. That's one of the reasons I like it. The other reason I really like the Green Giant is that they are resistant to deer and rabbits. So most arborvitae are deer magnets and rabbit magnets. And so when you have a nice row of these, if you're in an area that has a lot of rabbit damage, they may chew the bottoms off of, say, an emerald green arborvitae. They may chew the bottoms off of that up to about 12, maybe even 24 inches. So there's just bare, no leaves at all, no foliage at the bottom, and then the rest of the plant is healthy. And in the case of deer, they'll trim all the way up to, you know, about 4.5 feet. And so it can look very, very poor. And of course, it doesn't offer the privacy that you were hoping to get out of it, and it can be very frustrating. In the case of Green Giant, they completely leave it alone. They just don't touch it. At home, we have a deer issue. We, again, inherited some old Eastern Arborvitae, maybe Techni, maybe Dark Green American. I'm not entirely sure. My guess is Techni. And they're all trimmed to right here. The deer over the years, over the 30 years that these have been there, have trimmed every single one of them to about 4.5 feet. So all I need to do is just duck underneath, and I can walk right underneath this, what was supposed to be a privacy hedge. As some of those have died off or been damaged in storms, I've replaced them with Green Giant. My Green Giant are branched all the way to the ground. The deer walk that line every single night, and I never have an issue with those. They've been in for, the oldest ones have been there for 6 years, but I've been kind of plunking them in as I have opportunity to do so. Very fast-growing evergreen. Green Giant will grow 3 feet a year. I mean, they are incredibly fast-growing. We planted a 5-foot, pretty skinny, kind of leftover Green Giant. Believe it was we had a Thanksgiving snowstorm, really heavy, wet snow. I want to say it was like 4 years ago. So the following spring, I had this kind of thin, ratty Green Giant, and I put it right in that spot where a Techni was damaged in that snowstorm. And we were looking at that tree, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago, and I didn't put a measuring stick next to it or anything, but I would say it's about 15 feet high. It started as a very skinny 5-foot 3 years ago, and it's 15 feet high. So really incredibly fast growing, great for screening and privacy. Landscape size is going to be about 20 to 25 tall, maybe 8 to 10-ish wide. They do not mind growing together, so if you want to plant these really close and make sort of a wall, they will be perfectly fine with that. It's kind of I guess, a common misconception that trees can choke each other out. There are some instances where that can happen, but trees of the same species really do not mind growing together to one another. So when one grows into the next, everything you see from the outside is going to be nice and green. If you were to pull back the branches and look inside, some of that area is going to be, will have no foliage. But the plant is perfectly healthy. There's no problem with that. Of course, if you dug one of those out and removed it, there's going to be a big bald spot, but it's not unhealthy for the plant. It does perfectly fine. So these can be planted and grown together and form a wall or a big windbreak or screen. So they really do hold up great, and they're fast growing. So I really like the Green Giant a lot. Another arborvitae that I'm actually a really big fan of are these right behind me here. This is a relatively newer introduction for us. We've been growing it for, I don't know, about 6 or 8 years, maybe a little longer. It's called Nordic Spire Arborvitae, and it was actually introduced by a local plantsman, Peter Orm, brought it over from Denmark, I believe. And it has this almost weeping habit to it. If you're familiar with weeping Alaskan cedar, it's very reminiscent of that. I believe that it is a hybrid of some kind. I'm not entirely sure what its full parentage or lineage is, but it is also deer resistant. We grow these. These are grown here on our farm. The deer walk right through them on a regular basis. They have never touched these, even though we've got some deer damage on some other evergreens close by. Some of the emerald green arborvitae have deer damage on them, but these are doing great. But they have this really nice kind of natural droop or weep to them, and they have branches that kind of shoot out in various areas, so they end up being a very big, full specimen type evergreen. So again, they could be used as a privacy screen. They could be used as a specimen plant. You could put one by itself at the corner of the house. You could put one by itself in the back corner of the yard with shrubbery of some kind on either side of it. So it's very decorative, but also is going to give you that screening and privacy and all of that kind of stuff. So I really like Nordic Spire a lot. 25-ish by 15-ish, maybe 30 tall by 15 wide, give or take a little bit. I would say that's a pretty good average landscape size for Nordic Spire. And I really do love the texture on those a lot. It's a great tree. Moving on to a few of the less common varieties. Right over here we've got white fir, or what's known as a concolor fir. And the reason that I wanted to point this one out is that if you're looking for a replacement for Colorado blue spruce and don't want all the disease headaches that Colorado blue has, we don't even sell them, by the way. We haven't for many years, just because of all the disease issues. And I know that my customers don't want to be out there spraying it 3 times a year, which is what you need to do in order to try to keep the disease at bay. So we have elected not to grow it or sell it. But this is a wonderful replacement tree. So concolor fir has this beautiful, soft, textured needle. It almost feels artificial, to be honest. When you rub your fingers on here, it almost feels like the needles are made out of like a soft plastic or something. And it has this really nice blue color to it. The tree's relatively slow to moderate growth rate, so it's not the fastest growing tree in the world, but they're very hardy. They're very disease resistant. They're very long lived. They have this beautiful silver bark, which you don't really get to see much because the tree ends up being pretty dense, but it has a bark that is very typical of fir, which is this kind of smooth silver bark. Really just a neat textured tree. And because it's a fir, it has that traditional fir fragrance, which is like that Christmas tree fragrance. So just a really good tree all around. Average landscape size is about 40 tall and 20 or 25 wide. But keep in mind, they're not very slow, but they're certainly slow growing. So 40 foot is going to take, 30 years, give or take a little bit. So it's going to take quite a while to get to a full mature size. But they do live a long time, and they are very hardy. So it's a really good choice. They're not super common. They are a little hard for nursery growers to propagate and grow. Once you get them established in the landscape, though, they're like tough as nails. I mean, they really hold up great. So really good choice. This is one of my other favorite evergreens. This is a common Christmas tree. It's called Douglas fir. So oddly enough, Douglas fir is not actually a fir. So if you look at our well, actually, our signage is wrong, so never mind. I was going to say, if you look at our signage, Douglas fir is one word. It's not Douglas fir, it's Douglas fir. So it's all one word, whereas all of the other firs, like the white fir that we just looked at, is a true fir. So it's got its own family. This is Douglas fir, and it has this very soft needle, exceptionally fast growth rate. So Douglas fir will grow twice a year, which is a little abnormal. So most evergreens push one time. They push new growth one time a year, where Douglas fir normally will put out 2 flushes of new growth, one in the spring, one a little later in the summer. Its average growth rate is about 2 to 3 feet a year, so it's quite fast growing. It has typically a light to medium green color. Every once in a while, you'll find one that has a blue tinge to it. Douglas fir, at least ours here, are grown from seed. So there's a lot of genetic variation in them, just like if you have, 6 kids and one has curly hair and one has straight hair and one has blonde hair, one has brown hair, that's genetic variation. The same is true of seed-grown trees or seed-grown plants. And so when Douglas fir are grown, you're going to have some that are medium green, some that are dark green, some that are blue-green, some that have a little longer needle, some that have a little shorter needle. But generally speaking, they're all going to be very, very similar in that they grow fast, they're very disease resistant, they don't get needle cast, they don't get Zimmerman pine moth. They're a great screening plant. The birds love them. They do get quite large. This is another one of those where if you look online, if you say, if you Google how big does a Douglas fir get, it might tell you 300 feet, and that's absolutely true. I was out on the California coast late last summer, and there's Douglas firs that are, have trunks that are 6 feet across and are 200 and some odd feet tall. So, I mean, they get massive out in their native habitat. But around here in the landscape, I would say about 40 tall and 20 wide. So they're a little more upright than most. They don't get super, super wide, but they hold up really well. Really big fan of Douglas fir. And then right down here, we've got white pine. So white pine has a very long, soft needle. It is resistant to the diseases that I was mentioning about Scotch pine and Austrian pine. So it has this really nice soft needle, which actually is green with like a little white stripe in it, thus the name white pine. So if you look kind of really closely in there, you'll see almost a two-tone-ish appearance. Don't know how well that shows up on the camera, but white pine are one of the few native conifers in Illinois. So for the most part, you know, if we went back 200 years to before settlement or before a lot of settlement in Illinois, you would not have seen very many evergreen trees at all. One of them that you would see would have been white pine. So white pine grows natively like down around Starved Rock, along the Rock River. There's a state park called White Pines. Generally high up on bluffs and, you know, well-drained areas is where you would find white pine. White pine hate to be low and wet. So if you have a damp spot in the backyard, or if your yard slopes and you kind of have a lot of runoff, that kind of stuff, probably not a great location for white pine. If you have well-drained soil, or if you can plant it somewhere higher and drier, it's really going to hold up well. Or if you have maybe a berm situation or something like that, that would probably work out really well too. I think there's a killdeer nest nearby, and they're not super happy with our presence, so we'll keep moving along here. But white pine, I would say 40 to 50 tall around here, 20 to 30 wide. They do stay nice and full when they're young, but then they start to open up and kind of get a little more layered appearance with age and maturity. Still very beautiful. Maybe not the best plant. If you're looking for like ultimate screening and privacy, white pine will thin itself out a bit. It's not going to be sparse. It's not, you know, but it's just not going to be as dense as some of the other varieties that I've mentioned. This tree right here, unfortunately, it's going to be very hard to see the whole tree and why it's called this, but this is called a lace bark pine. Lace bark pine has a stiff needle, but it's still relatively soft. It's not super pokey or prickly like some pines are. Again, almost has an artificial texture to it. Almost feels like the needles are made out of plastic. It holds up really well to heat and wind and everything else. It tends to be relatively full in its youth and moderately full with maturity. But it gets the name lace bark pine from this beautiful mottled bark. So it's kind of like green and gray and brown blotches on the bark, slightly peeling. It's really very pretty. I think we can start to see a little bit of that right in this one here. You can kind of start to see some of that blotchiness starting in there. And as the tree matures, that's going to become more and more evident. So you're going to have these peeling sections, and so there's going to be green, and there's going to be brown, and there's going to be sometimes kind of a reddish brown, and just really a beautiful texture. So if you're going for more of like a Japanese garden type look, or you just really want something unique, this is a great one. What I like to do with these is I actually like to trim off some of those lower branches and expose some of that bark so that you can see a trunk, where normally in the case of most evergreens, I like to keep them branched all the way to the ground. I don't love to trim them up. Maybe white pine looks nice when they're trimmed up, but otherwise I typically leave them. But I really do like to trim up the lace bark pine to expose some of those branches so you can see the cool texture and all of that character that they have. So moving on, I did want to mention the upright junipers. So for whatever reason, and I really don't know why, junipers were super popular in the 80s and 90s, or this, maybe the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. And then for whatever reason, they just kind of fell out of favor. There's no problem with them. There's no real issues on them. They hold up great, but I think people just got tired of them. They were used quite often around the foundation of the house, and so I think it was just kind of overdone for a while. So they almost went away for a bit, and now they're making a resurgence in popularity. They're excellent screening plants. We grow a bunch of different varieties. I'm not going to run through all of them, but the upright junipers are very, very wind tolerant. They're typically very drought tolerant once established. Deer can be an issue, but not nearly as bad as on some of the arborvitae, so they really hold up well. Rabbits, not a typical issue for most junipers. And they're a variety, or they come in just about every shape, size, and color. So right behind me here, we've got, this is Spartan, which is known for its dark green color and very upright profile. We also have some varieties that have a much more wispy, sort of open appearance. We'll walk down the row just a little bit over here, and we can see some of those. So this is called Canart or Canert's juniper, and this is going to have more of this like natural wispy appearance. I really like this one a lot, especially when it's given some age and time to just kind of fill out and grow. They hold up really well. You can kind of see the sort of those spires kind of shooting off up at the top. So really a cool plant. Also has that green color. Right over here we've got, this is Skyrocket, and right next to it is Blue Arrow. So you can see there's just a really good mix of textures, colors, all that different stuff on these. They hold up really, really well to our winter and our weather here. The only thing they're sensitive to typically is overwatering. So we really, with evergreens in general, I guess actually trees in general, but evergreens more specifically, it's always best to give them a lot of water and then allow them to dry out for a period of time before you water them again. So in the case of most of these balled and burlapped evergreens, I typically put the hose at the base of the tree, let it run for about a half hour, and then let it dry out for 7 to 10 days. So it's really important that they're allowed to dry out so that the water can be used by the tree and or evaporate, and oxygen can get back into the soil. If the soil is constantly wet, oxygen gets pushed out and root rot can set in. And that's usually what happens. That's one of the only things that really get after a lot of these evergreens is some of that overwatering and root rot related issues. So water them really good, then let them dry out. Be consistent throughout the summer and fall months in particular. The toughest time of year for evergreens is winter, so you always want to make sure that evergreens go into winter with some extra moisture. So even though it may be cooling off, it's October, it's November, if we're not getting a lot of natural precipitation, rain or snow, whatever, it's a really good idea to make sure that they get a good watering once a week or once every 10 days during the month of November, so that as they go into winter, they're really well hydrated and the needles don't dry out over the winter time. So I've got just two more that I want to talk about over here. This is dark green American arborvitae, and on the other side we have, it looks almost identical, we have a variety called Techni. So these are really great trees if you don't have deer and rabbit issues. They're probably some of the more popular screening evergreens that we have. They're very commonly used. They have more of a gumdrop type shape rather than the real narrow pyramidal varieties of arborvitae. So they are kind of fat at the bottom and kind of rounded at the top. Depending upon the variety, they're going to be, Techni, I typically tell people about 16-ish feet high, 8-ish feet wide. Excellent screening plant, can certainly be grown close to one another and made into a fairly tight formal hedge or let go to be more natural. Dark green American will get even a little bit bigger than that, more like 20 to 25 tall and 15-ish wide, give or take a bit, but really good screening plants. We sell a lot of these. We've been growing them for years. Techni especially is a very, very popular variety, and it holds up great. So that's a really nice one. And then right down here, I wanted to show you a couple things here. This is emerald green arborvitae right over here. It's a very common landscape plant. It's very soft. It has this really nice, almost sheen to it. So it's got this kind of nice green color. But one of the things that I wanted to point out on this is, on these, I wanted to show you the root ball. And if we turn around right over here on the other side of the kind of the hose cable there that's holding everything up, you can see that nice big container on the bottom there. And the reason I wanted to point that out is one of the questions that I get asked very frequently is, wow, those emerald green arborvitae are way more expensive than fill in the blank of whatever box store or warehouse club that you have gone to. And I have seen some crazy, crazy low prices on emerald green arborvitae at some of those places. The downside, though, is a couple of things. One, those trees are mass produced, typically out on the West Coast or down south, where they are grown very, very fast. And when I say grown fast, I mean that they're grown in ideal conditions. They're pumped full of water and fertilizer, and they've got the perfect drainage, and they can push an excessive amount of growth. It does a couple of things. It makes a very weak tree, and it makes a tree that is just not very tolerant of our weather here. And when I say our weather, I'm talking about everything. The hot, humid summers, the wind that we have here, the crazy cold, low temperatures that we have during the winter time, drying winter winds. We get these periods where there's no snow on the ground and it's just bitter cold. Well, our emerald green arborvitae hold up perfectly fine to that. We have a very low, what we call loss rate on our emerald green arborvitae. One of our designers was at a client's house I think a week and a half ago, and the entire backyard, the homeowner had planted emerald green arborvitae, purchased from a box store. They were about 5 feet high. They had a very small root ball on them, which is the other downside to the emerald green arborvitaes that are shipped in from across the country into the box stores here locally, is they put a very small root system on them on purpose. They can put more trees on a truck that way, and that way they can keep the cost down because freight is very expensive. So when they can ship a whole semi-load full of 800 or 1,000 or whatever of these trees, they can put more of them on there if they have a smaller root ball because of weight and just because of space in general. Well, that small root system doesn't give the tree the ability to kind of moderate itself in terms of the water and the wind and the temperatures and all that kind of stuff. Long story short, this unfortunate new client for us, because they have lost about 85%. I mean, they had, I don't know the exact count, but there were 50 plus, maybe 70, I'm not sure, surrounding the yard, and 85% of them are dead. They watered them, they did what they thought they were supposed to be doing right, but it's very, very difficult to keep those trees alive and healthy when they have been grown fast. That's what I call it, grown fast. And again, that's just ideal conditions, excessive fertilizer. They can produce a plant much, much quicker than us. That's why the cost is so low. They're able to produce a 5 or 6 foot tree in 2 or 3 years. A 6 foot or a 7 foot emerald green arborvitae in our fields is probably 7 years old, maybe 8 years old. So there's a huge difference there. Yes, we do have to charge more for them, but you're getting a premium product. It holds up great. Our emerald green arborvitae have no issues with, with that like very high loss rate that you typically see. But they are a little bit more expensive, and we're okay with that. We also do offer a 3-year guarantee on every tree that we install, so that's a bonus as well. So that's true of all of these evergreens that we have discussed. So there's a million other options. I just wanted to show you a few of my favorites that are going to provide you with that windbreak, be a good screen, provide habitat for birds and other wildlife, and give you, make that backyard oasis type feel. So one of the things I love about the property that we have, it's a 1 1/4 acre property, so it's not huge, but it's really nice size for sure. But we're in a neighborhood, but when we're in our backyard, it feels like an oasis, and that's what I love. I love the evergreens that we have spotted around the perimeter of the yard and the other trees that are in there. The birds for sure love it. We have just a really wide variety of birds and wildlife in the yard. And I think a lot of that has to do with having proper habitat.